So greetings, folks. As always at Setsi, we begin all things by giving thanks to our ancestors, to our creator, to all our elders, our community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we share, grow, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. My name is Victor Beausoleil. I'm the executive director or steward of Setsi, and I'd like to introduce a remarkable group of panelists that are going to help us conceptualize what grant making looks like in Black communities from a racial, gender, and equity lens. I'm going to start with my remarkable brother, Omar. Go ahead.
Hello all, my name is Omar. I work as the Director of Community Investments or Grant Making with the Foundations for Black Communities. I am a husband, a father, a son. I'm a settler on Indigenous lands. I live in a place colonially known as Hamilton, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabeg, and many other Indigenous people that have lived in this land. And I'm excited to be here to share some thoughts on grant making, something that's been part of my life for nearly 2 decades now. And like we said before we came in, it's beautiful to see so many Black faces at the first Friday of Black History Month. So thank you all for being here.
Indeed, indeed. I'm going to hand it off to our colleague, Louise Adongo.
Hello, hello. My name is Louise Adongo. I am the Executive Director of Inspiring Communities. I am also on the board of CUA, which is Credit Union Atlantic, which is a mid-sized credit union here in Nova Scotia. And I have been involved in grant making, being on the side of the review panels and frustrating grant making organization staff by asking them to have questions that I can share about later. I am in Chipuktuk, which is Halifax, which is in Nova Scotia. And because it is Black History Month, Black history and Black features are important. And acknowledging the contributions of Black Canadians, including African Nova Scotians who have been contributing to Canada for over 400 years, is something that I want to put out there in the space as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Louise, for your consistent leadership and diligence and the remarkable work that you do. We're going to hand it off to our brother, Isaac Owolawafe Jr., who has been doing some incredible work with the Dream Legacy Foundation, Be Care Capital. And actually, Isaac, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, brother. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Isaac, founder of Dream Legacy Foundation. Again, the whole premise behind Dream Legacy when founded almost 10 years ago was to bridge the gap between the Black community and institutions when it comes to an economic point of view. And it's great to see, we're in a time where there's granting opportunities, investment opportunities for the Black community led by Black organizations.
Ashe, Ashe. Thank you so much, Isaac. And our colleague in Jerry did such an incredible introduction before we started recording. So hopefully you can do that justice again for us. Please introduce yourself, my good sister.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jerry Conchladi and I am coming to you from British Columbia. I live in the land of the Coquitlam, Kikite, and Semiahmoo First Nations, and I am a senior manager in financial resilience and inclusion at Vancity Credit Union, which is we always say it's the largest English-speaking credit union in Canada. I have been doing grant making since 2017. So 30% of all our profits go back to the community. And but we have really been trying to shift our thinking around how do we include everybody in grant making and ensuring that all the voices are heard and all the non-traditional nonprofits and even impact businesses are getting the funding that they really need to get to the next level. So really excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your leadership, Jerry. We appreciate you. My first question is actually to Louise. In terms of when you think about grant making from the perspective of a racial, gender, and social equity lens, what first comes to mind, and what are some of the promising models and communities of practice that you're aware of?
That was a multi-bullet question.
Just flowers.
I know, right? I'll start at the end where some models that I find promising and exciting is peer review of the grants that people apply for, where people who really understand the context, might understand some of the design plans or the communities with whom those who are applying for grants are saying they want to work. So there's just a real honest assessment, a more contextual assessment of what is being applied for, I think is really powerful. And I think it's powerful for two reasons. I think it's powerful because you definitely want context, expertise, but I think it's also powerful because it really shifts this mindset around objectivity and like kind of a distance and a separation of having the quality of that versus this quality of context. And I think it really forces a consideration of what is conflict of interest and what does that mean, especially where Black and racialized communities, there's few of us, and then depending on the context that you're working in, there's fewer and fewer of you. And so if you introduce conflict, then it essentially just distances people from each other who are working closer together. Then going back to what you had said before is, I think that one of the things that I hope I would like to see that would become a more promising practice is some of what Jerry had talked about around financial resilience is really this understanding of why we need to consider other budget lines and other budget categories that you wouldn't consider if you were talking to people who are the majority who have had structural benefits and privilege. So that, for example, you need to build in more readiness, more engagement, more wraparound supports that are indirect to what the grant is that is being applied for. And for anyone who is wondering, that's usually the place where I am in arguments with grant makers, is because I'm like, you're actually citing it this way, but for this group to succeed in this, you need to throw in a bit more because here's the hurdle that has to be overcome in order to achieve the outcomes that you're saying you want to achieve. And it's not a unfairness, it's actually more inclusive and more fair. And so I'll pass it on to other people to talk. Thanks.
No, those are remarkable, actionable insights. Thank you for your leadership. Omar, that same question, what comes to mind? What is at top of mind in terms of basically implementing models and frameworks that are equitable, that create a dynamic where no Canadian is left behind, to create a sense of belonging and a racial, social, and gender equity lens in grant-making practice?
Wow, that is really a big question, and I certainly agree with Louise's point around the lenses that make those decisions are really important. But I think like understanding the dynamics in grant making is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Like I usually use an analogy to say, imagine you're walking down the street and somebody asks you for $10. In that moment, you can understand all the dynamics of going to grant making. You wonder, well, what are you going to do with this $10? How do I know you're not going to spend it? What's going to be the outcome of me giving you this? Should I give it to you or should I do something else with it? All of those dynamics are very human dynamics. So I think in order to understand the challenges of the grant making, you have to understand the dynamics from a human perspective. Risk assessment, how is that happening? Impact measurement, like how do I know what this $10 is going to do something worthwhile? How is that happening? And power, who's making that decision? And I think it's those three elements that have to be investigated in grant making in order to make equitable and just grant making. And that investigation has to start with a different lens of understanding what people are, how communities work. And this is where I think African modalities, Black lenses, Black frameworks, to community development, to building strength amongst people can really be useful. So in order to create equitable grant making practices, my answer would be you have to investigate power, risk, impact measurement, risk assessment and due diligence and impact measurement. And you have to do so with modalities that are different than the current modalities and frameworks that exist. In order for those methodologies to work for Black communities have to author those systems themselves. The lens of we have to build up Black communities in order to function better in the existing systems is one solution, is one answer. But another answer is we have to challenge the existing systems themselves because they've never been proven. And a lot of those systems and frameworks that we use, especially for risk assessment and due diligence, are actually developed to keep Black communities out of wealth. That is how you know that those systems are working. So in the investigation of those three elements of grant making, which are based, I think, in very universal human impulses, we have to do so allowing ourselves to think more broadly than just how do we make Black people better fit in the current system. We also have to think about how do we make Black people authors of systems that are more functional than these. So that'd be my answer.
Remarkable, as always, my friend. I appreciate your leadership and diligence. I give thanks. Jerry, we're going to hand it off to you. At Vancity, you alluded earlier to some remarkable work that you've done. I think you went from a certain amount of money to a much larger sum of money in terms of your community investment department, and you had a remarkable process. Love for you to share some of those details.
Yeah, so last year was a remarkable year, which unfortunately is not going to be this year. I don't know. Well, we all know economic circumstances that brought us here. But last year, we had this opportunity to really not just look at an application, but go much, much deeper. Because sometimes, especially when you have racialized folks who've never done this before, they really are not as sophisticated in putting together an application. So what we would do is if we'd see an application that we had so many questions, we'd just pick up the phone and just have a conversation. And that was enough for us to make a decision instead of making them go back and forth and really making it onerous on them. What we really looked at was who is leading this organization, because, it's always been, you have all these white-led organizations that decide, oh, we're working with racialized people, we're working with Black people, or we're working with Indigenous. So we really looked at the leadership, and if there was no racialized person within that leadership, and you're saying you're doing work with racialized people, we would first of all just not even kind of move forward. We'd have a conversation with them and ask, how would you, why do you not have that in your leadership? So that was a question we asked a lot. So we did use a lot of trust-based philanthropy. When you talked about risk, it was at a place where we would give money and say, you know what, if we lose it, then that's fine. But at least we've given people a chance. And what we find is when you give people a chance, people really ensure that they use that money with the intended purpose. We did a lot of that, of people who had no history, and they were pretty new, but we knew them in community, for example, or we would really do our due diligence, and we were really ready to fund. So we did not have this cookie cutter approach to funding. Everybody was an individual, everybody was different. And we would look at, so going over and beyond made it a really, and to the point that we actually increased our Black-led granting by 46%. It was 46% of our total budget. And our total budget last year was $2 million. So that was something that I've seen the impact of it. There's one or two we may not see, we may not actually have any impact, but out of the others that we give a chance and we're seeing that, it was definitely worthwhile for us.
Thank you so much for all those actionable insights and your brilliance as always, Jerry. I'm going to hand it off to our colleague, Isaac Oluwalafe. You've been doing some remarkable work, not just at BKR Capital in the VC space, but also at the Dream Legacy Foundation and with your remarkable colleague, the Executive Director, Nellifer. I'd love to hear your perspective on navigating systems, but especially looking at grant making from, once again, a racial, gender, and social equity lens.
Yeah, absolutely, and great comments by the panelists. It's even for me, it's great to see the work that's being done by each individual, and this is why it's such a great time and opportunity for the Black community as a whole, because we're part of institutions, Vancity, we're part of organizations, we're part of government, and we're bringing different perspective. It's hard to change a system if we're not within that system of those institutions. First off, it's hard to change a system if institutions aren't willing to change it, right? And then we need representations within those institutions so that they could help in changing those systems alongside the allies that are part of those institutions. And that's what we're seeing in this current last couple of years. And that's why we're seeing some economic changes within our community. But when you look at the work that Dream Legacy is doing, like what we decided to do is tackle changes and issues in industries that we're familiar with, whether it's the entrepreneurship industries, whether it's tech and innovation industry, whether it's skilled trades industry, construction, infrastructure. We saw those gaps through our private sector entities, and we said, let's create an organization that's able to go into those gaps, but coming in from a different lens. Because when you're trying to make changes within a system and industries, you got to come in from a different lens. You can't take a private sector lens in making those changes. So that's why we launched Dream Legacy Foundation, and we've been fortunate to be given the opportunity to help in making those changes alongside great organizations that we collaborate with. And those changes, sometimes when you see what the gaps are, require granting. It can't just be, and require investments. Vancity, we thank them for being part of even BKR's LPs, because when we're making change, you need risk dollars. And I think one of our panelists talk about assessing those risks, but sometimes you got to take calculated risk for those changes to happen faster and without a burden of a loan while making those changes. So it's great to see that there's granting opportunities at the table, but I think it's presenting why those type of structures required, especially for an underrepresented community like the Black community that's trying to make strides today and not tomorrow, right? So granting is a key component to that.
Absolutely. There's a lot of challenges that we face: systemic barriers, structural racism, anti-Black racism, exclusion of Indigenous communities, the fact that women and matrilineal matriarchal models that govern many of our Indigenous communities are not put at the forefront in terms of the allocation of resources. When I think about these concepts, I think about just decolonized approaches to grant making. So my next question is to you, Louise. In terms of the concept of a decolonized approach to grant making, what does that look like to you? Is it a bottleneck? Is it an entity flowing dollars to one entity that subsequently flows to other? Like, what does a decolonized approach look like to you when it comes to grant making?
Man, I don't even know where to start with answering your question, right? Because why do we need grants? Right? If we're in decolonized approach, why do we need grants? What are the ways in which the system has created gaps and let communities down historically for generations, to the point where grants and grant making is how we're closing those gaps if we're successful in getting those grants. But as I don't know if this was, I thought this was the question that you were going to answer, but this was the answer I was going to give no matter what question you asked me. I think that, so one of the things that I have asked endlessly is, when you apply to the current model of grants, because you can't break the model at the same time, is there's not even this checkbox that says, hey, do you want us, the person who is asking you to apply for grants, to connect you with other people who have applied to something similar to what you are saying you want to do, or something that is related that you should connect to together? So even that would be one stage of decolonizing, although I think that's information sharing. But really just shifting from this single organization, single purpose, single thing, element of design to more holistic, what are we trying to do here? Why isn't it okay for three of you to come together and give us an even more powerful, this is the grant we've put forward. You come with over and above that thing, because it might actually be better for us, whatever the organization is that has the money, to fund this more robust collective contributory effort that you have put forward than this minuscule siloed approach to fragmented grant funding distribution. But really also just interrogating, why do we need grants in the first place? And I don't know if we're going to get to social finance in this conversation, so I'm just going to put a plug in around it. That is some of what I find challenging with the social finance. The way that I've interpreted the narrative is, we need to make this sector, we need to monetize or capitalize on for many different reasons, including cost savings to government, when some things are actually supposed to cost money. Some services are actually supposed to cost money. So I guess that's what I would say, is that there's many possibilities. I've granularly given the examples I would give. I'll let the other amazing panelists share more.
No, that's so helpful. And definitely there's no rules in terms of what we can talk about, but I have seen innovation happening over the past couple of years. Like when I think about the investment readiness program and the innovative approaches they've looked at in terms of not just reporting, but onboarding communities that have been left out for a very long time. I can speak for the IRP. I can't speak for the entire model, but I can say that I'm seeing shift in government because they're actually seeing and acknowledging and hearing the voices that were traditionally excluded and on the margins. So thank you so much for all those actionable insights and your brilliance as always, Louise. My next question is going to go to Omar, and it's a very similar question. We're talking about decolonization. We're talking about the fact that we live on colonial lands. And we're talking about the fact that a lot of nations under colonial rule were built on stolen land and free labor. And now we have robust ecosystems of nonprofits, charities, and philanthropic foundations trying to figure out ways and means to create better economic outcomes for Canadians. So when you think of decolonization and grant making, what comes to mind? How can we move forward in a way that's more progressive with greater stewardship as opposed to this dominant leadership framework that's usually patriarchal in nature?
Thank you for this question, Victor. I smile because this is at the heart of the work that we do at FFBC. This is the question we ask ourselves almost on a daily basis, and you know, with full knowledge of how pervasive, ubiquitous, and all-encompassing the colonialism is, especially in the lives of Black communities. To answer that question, we start at, you know, what is the central philosophy of colonization? The central philosophy is that Western European Christian nations have the requirement to go out into the world and civilize uncivilized people, teach them how to become civilized and live in society. So for us, a critical component of doing work in a decolonial way is to say, we're not here to learn. We are equal participants in system authorship. We are equal teachers. Black people do not need their capacity built to become like a colonial system. In fact, what needs to happen is the colonial system needs to change that pervasive philosophy and admit that it can learn from Black people. So in our approach at FFBC, we try to create an alternative to traditional grant making using unapologetically a Black framework. And we call it the Ubuntu model of participatory grant making, very purposefully, because Black models and Black frameworks and worldviews are much more effective. Ubuntu is a much more effective model to take to community development than neoliberalism as defined by colonial experimenters. And we demonstrate that, and we ascribe it to Black knowledge. And we demand in Canada that there be systems alternatives written by Black people, just as Canada accepts system alternatives written by Quebecois, the Quebec French people. Just as Canada accepts that there is alternative, the Quebecois people are worthy of writing systems, and those systems are of equal value to the colonial systems, that they don't have to teach them how to become more colonial, they can share. We have to stand alongside our Indigenous brothers and sisters and say, we too can write systems, we too are systems authors, we too can create alternatives that work for Black people. And by insisting that we can teach and we're not here to be civilized, I think the work inherently becomes anti-colonial. So that's my answer to that.
Ashe, thank you so much for your leadership and brilliance. As always, my brother, for those who don't know, Ubuntu is a term, a Bantu term that means I am because we are. Thank you, my brother. I appreciate you. We're going to move on to our incredible colleague, Jerry. While working as almost an entrepreneur within Vancity, I don't want to date you, so I'll let you say how long you've been there.
Yeah.
While working within this institution, you've had to go through a series of processes, not just to decolonize approaches to this work, but more importantly, you've had to find ways and means to actually advance how you did grant making. So you alluded to and you spoke to creating less onerous administrative processes for very distinct groups and vulnerable distinct groups. You've spoken to consulting processes, but I'd love for you to share a little bit, if you're able to, and be a little more vulnerable in terms of how your institution was able to navigate that tension, primarily because we have lots of folks inside this room that represent institutions, and many of them are internal champions. But I saw the sophistication, the grace that you were able to navigate those tensions between leadership, governance bodies, fiduciary responsibility, risk, and the community. And I thought it was just remarkable.
Wow, thank you. Yes, it's been a journey. It's been a real journey. And for us to be where we are now, I think has been like something it's been progressing. I mean, I'm just going to put this in the chat. This is we changed our application form. I think that was the biggest deal. We changed our application form. And what we did, we ensured that we want to embed reconciliation, racial equity into the way we were, so that people can actually, when you read our application, you see yourself in that application. Because we say we encourage Black, Indigenous, and then we list what it is that we are looking for. And that really made people confident to be able to apply for granting. But to get us here, I think, again, we know it's since 2020, people's thinking has shifted quite a bit, even the language, because language is so important. And so being able to see yourself in a process as a Black nonprofit or a Black business owner has really been, I think that has, or even an Indigenous one or a racialized, has really been what has been able to make people more confident in being able to apply. And knowing that, because we've called it out in our application, this application used to be a 12-page application, talk about decolonizing, and now it's a 2-page application. So really ensuring that, again, we are not giving the burden to the grantees, that the burden is actually ours to do our job. They can give us the information, but the burden is ours to do our job. So yeah, I think I hope I've answered the question, but it's been a very gradual, like I've seen, because there was a time we could only we would not even move further when you did not tick the box we wanted. But now we stopped ticking boxes and we are actually just doing something a little bit different.
Victor, do you mind if I pipe up for a follow-up?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious how much you can share in the limited time, some of that back end. Like, I really appreciate what Isaac said before about where we are in institutions and why that matters. That's part of what I'm curious about is, how does Jerry walk into Vancity and say, we need to do this, we're doing this, I have a plan. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just give one example of we have three, like when, we have 3 groups. In BC, we don't have a lot of Black people. Let's start with that. But we have three groups that are leading the work around Black entrepreneurs. So we have Black Business BC, Black Entrepreneurship BC, and we have another organization called the Collective Bunch. So we've been trying to have a loan product because I know FACE got funding, but that funding is actually not enough for all the entrepreneurs we have across the country. So I looked at that and I said, there's a gap here. We have these organizations that have all these amazing Black businesses, but those businesses are not able to, they're actually not able to get the funding, for one thing, because most of them just want up to $10,000, while FACE starts from $10,000 and up. A lot of people just need $5,000 to get them going. So I worked together with our team and we put together a business case where we showed the benefits and why this is so important. And we now have what we call a Black entrepreneurship program. We're not calling it a loan program. It's a program where we funded these 3 organizations. We gave them some capacity building funding, so that what they do is they do the pre-work. So they work with an entrepreneur, help them, get their business plan, really help them with that pre-work so that they're able to apply for a loan. But, you can do that anytime. You can walk into a branch and open a loan. What really makes you successful is the post-work where now you've got the loan guess what? I'm just going to work with you, do some marketing, taxes, all these wraparound services that you never really get when you get a loan. You're really on your own. So we've actually paid. I try to do it as a multi-year so that we know we are stable for the next 3 years. But anyway, we give them quite a bit of funding and they were able to hire people to do this work with entrepreneurs. They were able to build the capacity of the entrepreneurs and of the organization themselves. So, and we have seen a huge uptake. We had over 46 applications come in, and we have a microfinance program that is the one that we are supporting them to get the funding through. But we have seen a huge uptick. And then also internally, we are working with our teams and saying, you can't look at this application like a regular application. You have to have a different lens, take the time. So so that's just a little bit, but it comes because there's that mindset too in the organization. They want to do something, they don't know what to do. But you're showing them something that's not only helping the Black community, but it's actually helping the organization because we're getting loans. So it's a win-win for everyone, but also it gives people, especially the Black entrepreneurs, a safe space to know they don't have to walk into a branch, find anybody to help them. They actually work with this organization who we have dedicated account managers who they go to directly, and then they do the post work with them. So maybe just a little bit of but that just comes from showing this is the value that they are bringing, and this is a value to the organization. And we all need new members, new account holders, new loans, but also building up our Black businesses.
Absolutely. That's absolutely remarkable. Thank you so much, Jerry. Louise, were there any follow-ups specifically around that? Okay, incredible. I'm going to hand it off to our colleague, Isaac Olawalafe. My brother, in terms of the Black Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, that was a grueling process that you had to go through, but you prevailed. And that process taught me a lot. When I look at the work that Setsi is doing right now around this, we have an initiative we call NICE, the National Intermediary Innovation Case Study. And what we've identified is there you have the Supporting Black Canadian Communities Initiative of 4 intermediaries. You have the Social Finance Fund of 3 intermediaries. You have the Community Service Recovery Fund of 3 intermediaries. You had, remember, the Loan Fund of FACE with intermediaries. You have the Black Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub of 3 intermediaries. And if anyone watches the news today, you know what's going on with the Black Led Endowment Fund. Right now, there is almost a bit of a crisis in terms of how resources are allocated to intermediaries and wholesalers, and how we can create processes that are competitive, but processes that also do not create a sense of tribalism and do not create a sense of contention within communities. And I think of this because my wife and I were watching a movie last night called Outlaw King, and it's about Robert Bruce and all these Scottish tribes trying to navigate a colonial framework. And so just to be clear, tribalism isn't something that's distinct to the Black community. Every community faces this level of contention. But I'm bringing this up in the case of the Black Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, my friend. What were some of the pain points in terms of going through that process? Because I've seen the remarkable results once you were selected and once community rallied around you as a selected party.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And, first off, thank you to all the communities, hundreds across all the leaders of different organizations across Canada that rallied behind Dream Legacy Foundation, hundreds of them. Thank you to the private sectors, to the different institutions, municipalities, et cetera. And I think the biggest thing there was really understanding one thing, collaboration. There's this knowledge, and then what is the end goal? I think in any application that an organization partakes in is understanding that this application is not about them. This application is not necessarily even about the organization. It's about the end result, which is our community. And saying that if you have the opportunity to have that baton, understand that is to pass it on to another organization, pass it on to another group, or collaborate together while you're holding the baton. And that's always been our strategy at Dream Legacy, and that's why I think we're always able to collaborate with different organizations for sectors that we understand. This was Knowledge Hub research for entrepreneurship. For 15 years, I've been battling in different industries that predominantly we don't see ourselves in. And while battling in those industries, I made it a point to shed light on what it takes to enter those industries, and also win in those industries, not guard any information. And now, fortunately enough, I've been granted the opportunity alongside other organizations, alongside institutions, because you can't scale without institutions. And we've known that for the last 10 plus years. So that's why it wasn't a hard situation for us to get key institutions to buy into what we're trying to do across Canada under entrepreneurship. But also realizing it's not just entrepreneurs that are here in Canada, but entrepreneurs that are also coming to Canada from the Caribbean, from the continent, and making sure when they come here and land that they have access to information, they have access to resources, they have access to other collaborative partners, they have access to allies, right? So that's why it's so important that we understand as a community when we're going down these paths of applying for different initiatives, that is not about ourselves, it's about the end result. And once I think as a community, we understand that, we'll be multiplying whatever funding we got. Because $200 million, $5 million Knowledge Hub, X amount for BKR, $19 million. These are pennies when you look at the grand scale of capital that's going out for entrepreneurship, capital that's going out for research, capital that's going out for endowment. Just recently, you saw some of the universities piecing out endowment funds into organizations. I think it was SFU or another organization. We know the size of U of T's endowment fund, and the conversation on what percentage of Black students are in these universities, what percentage of Black workers are in the teachers' unions, and are those endowment percentage of that coming back to fund managers within our community. So we're just in the start of this economic journey. And what we need to understand as a community is that we're not just going after a couple $100 million, we're going after billions of dollars. But it takes a collectiveness, it takes collaboration, and having one mission that we're building generational wealth. And that takes infrastructure, that takes a process, that takes a lot of hard work, but most importantly, it takes collaboration.
Absolutely, my brother. I couldn't say it better myself. I always think of the steward leadership from the legacy leadership panel yesterday, and Martin Luther King, in the spirit of Black History Month, he had a quote. He said, "We need leaders not in love with money, but in love with justice, not in love with publicity, but in love with humanity." Let me say it again, not in love with publicity, but in love with humanity. Leaders who can subject their particular egos to the pressing urgencies of the great causes of freedom. A time like this demands great leaders. A genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a molder of consensus. When I think of that quote of MLK, I think of some of the crises that emerges in many communities as dollars are deployed. So my next question is back to you, Omar. In terms of, and I alluded to a nascent initiative Setsi's working on around this national intermediary innovation case study. What type of leadership and stewards do we require right now in terms of grant making and deploying capital within Black communities?
Wow, what a question. I think the short answer is we need many leaders. There's the Black identity is diverse. In Canada alone, there's 200 ethnicities of different Black communities, and what it means to be Black is very different depending on the geography that you're in. We heard about the Black population in British Columbia. That's a very different experience than what it is in Montreal, and that's a very different experience than what it is in Ontario, and that's very different than what it is in Nova Scotia. And so I don't think there's a single approach or a single type of leadership that will respond to the needs of Black communities or to the opportunities that exist in Black communities across Canada. I think the question is, how do we pivot away from what the system wants us to do and download the power away from ourselves into those Black communities themselves? How do we empower those communities that live in those multiple realities to become the decision makers in the process, to become the designers in the process? And we need leaders, I think, who are, at least some of the leaders have to be thinking in that way, because I think it's helpful, to what Louise was saying. No organization, none of us here will be experts in the experiences and conditions of Black communities and opportunities that exist in Black communities across Canada. None of us will. But those communities that exist in those realities, those people that engage with those communities are experts. So how do we give them the power? How do we shift from the colonial system that tells us power should be vested in the most worthy, to African modalities and other modalities that tell us, no, we should all share power, and the health of the least powerful person and the health of the most powerful person are inextricably interlinked. Wealth does not get created by an individual; it gets created by a community. Wealth then should not be decided by an individual or by any type of organization. It should be decided by the community. So I think we need many leaders of many perspectives. But some of those leaders at least have to think about how to empower Black communities more broadly, to speak for themselves and not have avatars or representatives. And we also, I think, need to question the very paradigms with which we approach the work. Some of my colleagues at FFBC, we've spoken in the past about a post-colonial writer named Frantz Fanon, who wrote some very influential books about the Black experience after the official end of colonization in Africa. And one of the key insights that he had was one of the legacies of colonization is that you start to envision success and accomplishment by your proximity to that colonized you, and in that way perpetuate your own oppression. And I thought that, and I think that's a very insightful lens to look at it. And as we think about creating systems, and as we think about creating philanthropic institutions, and as Isaac said, as Black people become more and more represented in consequential institutions, I think that lens has to be there. I think we have to think, well, success as I understand it, what develops that? What shaped that? Why is it that I think this is the right way to do things? Why do I think this is what success looks like in philanthropy? And how does that perpetuate the oppression of the Black communities that I'm of? And the final thing that I would say in terms of what type of leaders do we need is leaders that understand the Sankofa principle, both looking backwards and looking ahead, understanding and basing our knowledge not in what Black communities are missing or how can we help them or improve them, but basing our imagining and our designing and our strategizing in the knowledge that everybody in this room is here not because the system understood our ancestors or our parents. Everybody in this room is better because our ancestors were better than the hurdles presented by those systems. They came up with solutions more innovative than the system could challenge them. And those solutions are invisible. They're invisible. And it's up to us to make them visible. So, we have to be based in that knowledge, and we have to be proud in the fact that our being here is in itself evidence of the capacity of Black communities. So many leaders, some of the leaders that consider how do we empower Black communities, and you have to take a lens which questions your very construct of what success and progress and achievement means. And that's what I would say.
So beautifully said, my brother. I appreciate you and I honor your passion, your conviction, and your incredible insights. Thank you, my brother. My father always taught me that power attracts the worst and corrupts the best. And I've been conceptualizing leadership since a young man and trying to become a better steward as opposed to leadership. So my next question is to Louise, specifically around your leadership role as a young Black woman, executive director in Atlantic, Canada, of I don't even believe a Black-led, Black-mandated, Black-serving organization. In terms of grant making, there's these terms that we use around conscious and unconscious bias, and these play out in many different ways. But I'd love to hear from you some insights from your social location and your lived experience.
So is the question you're asking me how conscious bias and unconscious bias plays out in grant making from my social location? Okay. So as a leader in an organization that is not Black-led, Black-mandated, Black-serving, in a context where growing up, I really appreciate, by the way, this feels like a church service, which is weird because it's a grant making panel, but like how Black is that our grant making and our spirituality and our wholeness as peoples is connected. And I was really touched. I was listening to you, Omar, because I was thinking of my parents, my grandparents, just like generationally, what wealth and movement of financials in the context of wellness looks like. And it just, took the conversation very different from where it was for me. So I would say some of what I've experienced as conscious bias, I think we've talked about already, which is what is being proposed cannot work unless somebody else who has done it better or the expert is alongside. And I've been really encouraged to hear Jerry talk about moving from X number of page application to a shorter application to a phone call. Like, oh my goodness, phone calls are for everybody. Appreciated the report that came out in 2020 about how little money was being spent in Black communities when we know, I remember going to the webinars about that, where some people are getting hundreds of $1,000s from like writing in the elevator, and then some other people are being subjected to 50 page. So there's this conscious and maybe for some unconscious bias of that there's already a diversion and a privileging of who and how and what gets funded. And I appreciated Jerry talking about some of the people that received money. This was their first time ever, because I would say that I think it is unconscious, is that evidence of previous success in receiving a grant is not actually evidence of efficacy, it's evidence in your ability to receive grants. And the problem of granting based on success of previous granting is that you are missing new entrants and you are having an overrepresentation of people who have received funds from people who haven't. And I see that a lot in our context. In my social location, in my organization, so we are in an intermediary in a social context, not in a grant making context, but we have found in our programming that we need to do seed grants and honoraria in a very different way than we ever did. And that we need to, for example, make sure that food and supports that are different than whatever programming we thought we were running in the community must be made available, and must be made available in a dignified way, because we know nothing and cannot assume anything about the people that are walking in the door to engage with our programming. And we have, through our own conscious and unconscious bias and being willing to step into this place where we call each other in with it. So our vision is centering equity and systems transformation in Atlantic Canada. We really are stepping in that space of, did we apply for enough money because we need honoraria? Being willing to push back when we apply for grants and are told, no, we don't fund honoraria. We're like, well, then how are we going to run this program? Because how are people supposed to participate if we're not compensating their time, their travel, their childcare, et cetera, et cetera? And yes, this honoraria has more zeros than you would think it should have, because how many zeros do you need to be able to not do what is your livelihood to do something? So I find myself in my location as a Black ED in a non-Black space and context of using what I know of the stories of my own Blackness and the people around me to really just kind of ask us inside the organization and people who we apply for grants to questions that consider a requirement to reflect on some of the things that Omar has been saying, and Jerry said that they did successfully at Vancity. Hopefully that answers the question. I do think that there is unconscious bias within the Black community ourselves, that how we see, sorry, I'm losing my thought, but around how we work together, just kind of what you said, and what leadership and stewardship looks like. And that disagreeing doesn't mean walking away and fragmentation, that in fact, there is a space for conflict that is generative. And I'm excited for what possibilities there are now that we have across the country come to a place of advocacy and activism that is starting to flow resources, where we see the beauty in our diversity, even in our divergence in how things should be done, as opposed to wanting to shut it down and walking away from whatever our tables and our spaces are. I actually want us to come further into the spaces with those multiplicity of perspectives, because I think where we're going, none of us have been before. Just like, as you said, us getting here, our ancestors didn't know what it would look like, and we're here. None of us know, so it's okay that it's messy.
Absolutely, absolutely. My elder always speaks about the difference between conflict resolution and conflict transformation. And we definitely need transformative processes to be able to venture into these new frontiers that, like you said, our ancestors would not have even dreamed or imagined we'd be having these conversations or be in these positions to influence the futures of our communities collectively. So thank you so much, Louise, for all those insights, for your vulnerability, and all that you shared. I'm going to shift gears a little bit for Isaac, specifically because of the word land has been used a few times. We talked about grant making. So when we think about institutions like CMHC, and when we think about the intersectionality around land access and grant making, there's folks in the social purpose real estate ecosystem that are looking at the need for land access. And you've been doing some remarkable work in that space for over a decade. I don't want to date you because the brother looks young and you are young. But so there's folks in the social purpose real estate space looking at land access. There's folks in affordable housing and co-op housing, but there's also folks in the food sovereignty movement looking at land access. And when I can reach out to my colleagues in the private sector and philanthropic sector, I hear things like folks in the philanthropic sector being outbid 3-1 by folks in the private sector. And these are folks in the philanthropy that are trying to purchase land for public use. So with that being said, Brother Isaac, what are your thoughts around this, my friend?
Yeah, no, well, again, housing, I think, is the next biggest piece that as a community we really need to double down on. I'm happy to see that over the last couple of years, entrepreneurship, tech innovation has been streamlined across the community in collaboration with institutions and organizations. But now we really got to double down on housing. Housing has always been an issue for the community for decades, but now it's an issue for mainstream. So now institutions are coming up with solutions for housing around affordable housing, affordable rental, affordable home ownership. The issue is that now is that it's not just underrepresented communities that lack access to housing. Now it's hidden mainstream. And we all know when things hit mainstream and there's solutions being created for mainstream problems, other represented communities, especially the Black communities, are typically last or part of the last group to get a solution. So it's very important as we have these conversations with institutions. It's very important when you look at what's happening with the Social Finance Fund, what's happening with other initiatives that CMHC is doing, that there's representation on those applications, that there's representation on those solutions, so that it's fair, and so that it has the end result for our community that we need, unless it's going to be a big problem for our community. Because, like you mentioned, like housing is the middle point of an economic sustainable community. Without housing, you can't talk about any other form of infrastructure. You can't talk about retirement homes. You can't talk about event space. You can't talk about the lack of hotels, the lack of community centers across our GTA, which we need, the lack of daycares. These are all infrastructures. If we don't solve our home ownership crisis within our community, how do we solve our other crises that involve infrastructure? And now there's food crisis that we're facing as well too, and which requires land. So that's why we're having strong conversations with CMHC, and the good thing they're listening, and there's different products that are coming, and I think the social finance will play a key role in driving affordable housing and working with nonprofits organizations that have linkage to the private sector, that have linkage to other institutions, so that $1 could be leveraged to turn into $5, so that 5 units could be leveraged to turn into 50 units, 100 units. We can't just be creating 3 units here, 4 units there. We need to look at solutions on how we have capacity, how we have scalability, especially when you look at locations like the GTA, where predominantly the Black community reside in the GTA, or areas in Montreal, areas in Ottawa, of course, Nova Scotia, and of course, BC, right? We got to be looking at solutions that gives us scalability. We don't have enough time to be doing 5 to 10 units at a time while construction costs are going up, while interest costs are going up. We're not going to make any dent on the problem that we face as a community. Other solutions, other communities are looking at scalability. And we got to start looking at that as well too when it comes to housing.
Thank you so much for your insights, your leadership, and your candor, my friend. So we're going to close off with calls to action for all three of you. In terms of your call to action, specifically around leadership within the Black community, around grant making on both sides, recipients, as well as the folks that are actually facilitating the grant making, what's your call to action? I'll start with you, Louise.
Thank you. So one of the things I'll say, I'll actually build on what I think William Sam said in the comments. So to paraphrase, it was for people to step in and become leaders, they need awareness. I agree with that. And I cannot remember if it was a Buddhist or Eastern proverb or whatever, but it's like, who is the leader? The person who showed up. So I would say that one place where we need as many of people that can show up as possible, peer reviewers. For grants, we really need to distribute that more. And if anybody wants to talk to me about how to raise awareness among their network of how to participate in that or how to lead in that way, please reach out. But I think that my call to action for leaders is simply for people to step up and start leading. I don't think leading, I think maybe how we conceptualize leading in our own mental models and what leadership looks like is not necessarily the same thing. Sometimes it's really just showing up.
Ashe, thank you so much for your leadership, as always, Louise. I'm going to pass it off to Isaac. What is your call to action to the community, my friend?
I think the biggest call to action is understand that this is a process. I think there's a comment about how this is new for a lot of us. So when something is new, there's going to be, I don't want to call it failures because it's lessons learned. As long as you're doing it on a forward pace, and collaboration, right? Again, there's a bigger goal at the end, and there's going to be more opportunities as we show that we could collaborate with what's already being provided right now, and be able to leverage that so that we could scale it to really have real generational impact. So the key word there is just collaboration.
Absolutely. I give thanks for your leadership as always, my brother. We're gonna give the call to action to our brother Omar.
Yes. Okay. So my call to action for Black communities, especially in the world of grant making, is to demand systems alternatives, to demand Black created systems alternatives. We don't need to change the existing system. If that system works for a subsection of society and it's effective for them, continue to do it. But it hasn't been effective for Black people, and Black people have every right to be authors of the system and not just subjects of it. And I think as we continue to think about, what are the strategies that allow us to succeed in the current frameworks, as we continue to do that and continue to support folks that are in those frameworks and our Black communities that come up with really innovative solutions, right alongside that, we should be saying, but the Black people that aren't in the system have been doing it this way for hundreds of years. This is why we exist here. All of this knowledge, all of these models, all of these frameworks, all of these approaches that are not regulated by the system is why we exist here. The government of Canada exists because of an assertion that the Crown has the right to make the rules in this land. It's simply an assertion. It doesn't have to be absolute. There is nothing natural about the end goals that were placed there for us. Sure, we can continue to strive to them, and we can continue, as our ancestors have and as everybody in this room continues to do, to overcome the hurdles and reach those end goals because Black people are excellent. But we also have the right to define our own end goals, to define our own finish lines, and to define our own paths there. And I think my call to action would be to keep both in mind, both the fact that we can support ourselves and collaborate in succeeding in the system, and we can demand to be authors of our own alternatives, just like many other communities in Canada has. And just like the government of Canada came in and asserted, it has the right to make the rules on this land. That'd be my call to action.
Ashe, brother. Fast alone or far together. As always, we begin things the way we start, by give thanks to our creator, to our ancestors, to our elders, to our community stalwarts, and all those folks whose shoulders we stand on as we share, build, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. We give thanks for your leadership and diligence, all of you. Have a remarkable afternoon.